Hello, my name is Max. I've been studying psychology for the last 6 or 7 years, with a heavy focus on the psychoanalytic tradition. I'm very familiar with the works of famous psychoanalysts like Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, Ernest Becker, Erich Neumann, and of course the video essayist boogeyman Carl Jung.
Is he in there?
Nah, the coast is...
Back in 2018, I earned my initial success on YouTube by applying psychoanalytic theory to a video game series called Silent Hill. Since then, people who have watched those videos have begged me to apply my knowledge to another psychoanalytically steeped game series called Persona, which is a spin-off from a bigger series called Shin Megami Tensei. I did do a short video on Persona about 3 years ago, but at the time I had only played 20 or 30 hours of Persona 4 and 5 combined, so I wasn't as thorough as I could have or should have been. At best, that video was just an overview of how Carl Jung's most elementary concepts influenced the series. Fast forward to 2024, and I have now played all of Persona 5, and I literally just finished Persona 3 Reload. And I've also played a good amount of Persona 4 and know a decent amount of the first two Persona games. Now, I finally realize that the worlds of the Persona games go beyond mere references to psychoanalytic concepts. They are not only mind-bafflingly sophisticated tributes to the psychoanalytic tradition, but are mostly accurate to psychoanalytic theory as well. Today, I will not only show you just how accurate these games can get, I will also reveal a couple of secrets along the way that I don't think most hardcore fans of Persona even know. Before I do, I will let you all know that the vast majority of this video is spoiler-free. You can watch up until the last 3 or 4 minutes, and then I will give ample warning before I spoil key plot points from Persona 3. Finally, if you end up enjoying this analysis, please give this video a like, consider subscribing to my channel, and maybe consider supporting me on Patreon and Subscribestar. I will put links to those in the description box below. Now, let's get started. First, I'm going to give a brief explanation of what the Persona games are all about to those who know nothing, but if you're already familiar, feel free to use the time codes in the description box to skip ahead. So, like with every piece of Japanese media ever, the main character is a young high school student. Within the first hour or two of these games, the main character finds out that our reality borders a world of unreality, just like the aforementioned Silent Hill. In this world of unreality, one can encounter the products of our mind and other people's minds, just like Silent Hill. Okay, you see why people were asking me to play this. Soon after this initial discovery, the main character realizes that the unreal world is starting to cross over into the real world. Sometimes this takes the form of demonic possession. Other times it's a psychic contagion, like apathy syndrome in Persona 3. On top of this, there's usually some sort of shadowy, mysterious organization that is aware of this unreal world and wants to use its power for selfish gain. Soon after uncovering all of this, the main character bands together with other teenagers and often some sort of animal to fight against the world of unreality as well as those who might misuse its power. They do this by wielding these magical forces that exist inside their minds, which are the titular personas. Now with that out of the way, let's begin with some basic psychoanalytic theory and how it works in the world of the Persona games. First, this world of the unreal that the protagonists venture into is clearly analogous to Jung's concept of the unconscious. Just as the products of our mind spring forth from the unconscious, just as the beasts of Silent Hill are symbolic representations of part of a character's unconscious mind, various gods and demons spring forward from this unconscious realm given physical form. There are two primary layers to the unconscious. One is the personal, and the other is the collective. The personal unconscious is the part of our minds that is, well, it's personal to us. It's where we store our memories, both positive and negative, the things that mold our personality. The equivalent of the personal unconscious in the world of the games would be the palaces of the main villains in Persona 5. As for the collective unconscious, that's somewhat harder to understand. To put it as short and succinct as I can, the collective unconscious is this psychic force that underlies and penetrates every aspect of reality. Within it contain the blueprints and building blocks of the universe, things that Jung referred to as archetypes. So for example, one of the primary archetypes, as laid out by the aforementioned Erich Neumann, is the Great Mother. Everything in the universe has a mother, be it the universe, which had the symbolically feminine void as its mother, or your own mother. Thus, the mother is an archetype of the collective unconscious. Now, Jung and Neumann believed that since the dawn of human consciousness, human culture has tried to illustrate this and other underlying archetypes through religious deities and fictional characters. We did this because we intuited that by illustrating the archetype as accurately as possible, we could learn to embody good archetypes and eschew bad archetypes. Ergo, if you wanted to become the best mother, you would look at mythological figures that human cultures hold up as the ideal representations of a mother, and try to emulate them. I will use another example that I've discussed a lot on this channel to further elaborate on archetypes, and also to set something up for later on. One common source of archetypal speculation from global religion is the highest form of God. I will list a few examples and then point to their common trait. There's Adam Kadmon from Jewish Kabbalah, a name some of you Persona 5 fans will recognize. There's Baphomet from the occult tradition, Brahman from Hinduism, Taiji from Chinese mythology, Servan from Zoroastrianism, Amun-Ra from Egyptian mythology, and the concept of Tao from Taoism. What all these gods and more share in common is what the 15th century mystic, Nicholas Cusanus, referred to as the coincidentia oppositorum, or coincidence of opposites. They are all unions of opposing things. Now, as for how one would try to emulate this paradoxical union, Jung believed that one would do this by integrating unconscious traits that were opposite to one's conscious personality. But we'll get to more of that in a moment. I also want to tease something else. Another example of the coincidentia oppositorum in religion was the Gnostic concept of the monad, which of course we see referenced in the monad dungeons in Persona 3, and the Monado Mandala in Persona 2. Hold on to those ideas, we'll come back to them in a few minutes. Returning to this idea of the collective unconscious, we see this take form in all of the Persona games. Broadly, it is understood as the Sea of Souls, but it is often given a different name depending on the game. For Persona 5, the collective unconscious / Sea of Souls is Mementos. For Persona 4, it's the Midnight Channel. For Persona 3, it's the aptly named Tartarus Dungeon, which was the name that the ancient Greeks gave to the underworld, which mirrored the dark underworld of the collective unconscious. These dungeons will often take on a chaotic, twisted form, always shifting and never firm in its shape. This is of course appropriate because it reflects the imperceivable unconscious and the imperceivable archetypes it contains. Within are the various gods and demons that humanity has created in an attempt to illustrate those underlying archetypes of life. These gods and demons can be assimilated by the main protagonist into the form of personas, and their powers can be used to fight the forces of evil. But before this can happen, however, they need to contend with these gods and demons in a way that is roughly, virtually, the same as Jung's process of personal development, what he called individuation. I will outline this process by starting with what is probably Jung's most famous and most easily understandable psychological theory, the shadow. In the Persona games, the enemies you attack in these unconscious realms are called shadows. Once you attack them, they usually turn into one of the gods or demons which you need to defeat. Now, regarding Jung's concept of the shadow, he believed that every human being has a dark side to their personal unconscious minds. This is the place where your inner demons reside, the parts of your personality that you have a hard time reckoning with. Often, we push these elements into unconsciousness because we don't know how to deal with them, But inevitably, if we don't deal with them, they resurface and attempt to subsume our conscious personality. In simpler terms, our inner demons can possess us and turn us into figurative monsters. However, the shadow is not just where our negative traits reside, it is also the source of all of our positive potential. Let's say you could be a doctor, but you don't want to study or take on the responsibility. Thus, you push that potential into your shadow. So in short, those who contend with their shadow and succeed will bring those negative traits under their control, instead of letting those negative traits possess them. Plus, doing so might reveal new positive traits that you didn't know you had, thus making you stronger. Much of this theory carries over to the Persona games. By successfully contending with a shadow, one gets more powerful by gaining money, experience points, and/or assimilating the god/demon behind that shadow. However, there is a difference, because in the games, you most often contend with other people's shadows in the collective unconscious. In contrast, Jung believed that people could only really contend with their own shadows in their personal unconscious. I suppose one could theoretically face other people's shadows if they were somehow able to enter the collective unconscious, but that's a level of woo-woo that would make a Lister Crowley blush. There's also a key difference in the way Jung's concept of persona contrasts with the game's presentation. In reality, a persona is an exaggerated and sometimes false version of our true selves that we project to other people, either to just get along in society or to impress somebody. In the games, a persona is a living mythological creature that you can use to fight your battles. While the aesthetic and behavior of that persona might reflect a character's personality, it's not like, say, Goro Akechi in Persona 5 is going around in real life pretending to be Robin Hood. That would make him crazy, although a certain section of Portlandian anti-capitalists might see him as their messiah. Still, contending with a shadow and gaining the abilities of a persona to become stronger is roughly equivalent to contending with one's personal shadow and using it to develop a stronger ego and/or persona. Or maybe we develop our ego so strongly that the persona is rendered unnecessary. Now let's return to archetypes and how the games make use of them. Unlike archetypes in real life, where there was the idea of something and then its variations, the archetypes in Persona are categorized according to the major arcana of tarot cards. So for instance, a persona like Bishamonten in real life might be considered a representation of the archetype of the warrior. In Persona 3, however, he is an archetype of the Tower Arcana. Now, what does he have to do with towers? Probably nothing. See, in these games, sometimes things are associated with Arcana in a way that makes no sense. Like, what does the little girl in Persona 3 have to do with the hung man Arcana? Wait, don't answer that question! Though the use of the Arcana as archetypes in the Persona games isn't technically accurate, it is meaningfully accurate, and here's why. Jung believed that while the major arcana tarot weren't the only archetypes, they were still archetypes. He, along with my 2D spirit animal, Mr. Edogawa, believed that they represented key figures in the stories of every person's life. By encountering and contending with them, one can live a healthy, meaningful existence. In the games, one encounters variations of these archetypes, not just in the form of the gods and demons, but in the social links. By fulfilling the maximum potential one can have with each archetype, by maxing out the social link or getting the most powerful version of a god/demon in each arcana, one can achieve their apotheosis, their own highest ideal. I will use Persona 3 to demonstrate two examples of how that ideal is achieved. One is with the Monad Dungeons. Remember before when I said that the Gnostics used their concept of the monad to illustrate their highest god? This is because the monad was, according to the Arab Gnostic Monoiamos, the single point from which all of the universe sprang. It contained all the opposites of life within one seed. By meditating on that state of oneness represented by the monad, a process that the Gnostics referred to as gnosis, one could achieve apotheosis, a state where they become indistinguishable from the monad. Now, Jung believed that the Gnostics were the first psychologists, in effect because their process of gnosis was basically the same as his process of individuation. Jung literally thought one could theoretically achieve a state similar to the monad by doing something that I referenced earlier in this video. At this time code, I said that one could emulate the highest God by integrating unconscious contents into consciousness. When those opposite contents are fully integrated, one would achieve what Jung called the self, the version of you where all your potential is realized. Quoting from Carl Jung's Red Book, the self, I thought, was like the monad which I am, and which is my world. By going into the monad dungeons in Persona 3, one is contending with the aspects of the unconscious that are the most threatening to you. They are the most powerful monsters in the game, save for the Reaper and the endgame boss. By contending with them, you get the greatest rewards. Also, here's something that I bet none of you knew about Persona 3. Jung believed that various religions across the world attempted to illustrate the monad using mandalas, geometric illustrations meant to represent wholeness. Now, what geometric pattern do we often see littering the various levels of Tartarus? That's right, the archetype of the monad, the promise of your fully realized self, is calling to you as you contend with the unconscious. Now, before I explain what the second highest form of development looks like, I will issue that promised spoiler warning for Persona 3. If you have not played that game and have been meaning to, bookmark this video and come back to it when you're done. You have been warned. So, the second key way in which the protagonist achieves apotheosis is with the final boss battle with Nyx. As the character Ryoji says, Nyx is a, quote, maternal being, the greater mother of night looking to subsume the whole world. She is the cause of the apathy syndrome that is making people all over Japan depressed, making them want the world and all of its inhabitants to die so their pain may cease. In this sense, Nyx represents the negative aspect of the Great Mother archetype, or what Sigmund Freud would refer to as the devouring mother aspect of human unconsciousness. When life gets too painful, there's a desire for unconsciousness, a return to the pre-conscious state, represented by the fetus floating unconsciously in its mother's womb. The widespread apathy syndrome promises that Nyx will come and provide that by destroying the world, returning everything to that unconscious void before the universe was birthed. According to whoever wrote Persona 3, the Greek goddess Nyx was an attempt to illustrate this archetype of the unconscious mind, this negative, devouring side of the Great Mother archetype and our desire to let her consume us. As for the relation Nyx has to the apotheosis of the main character, if one can overcome the greatest representation of negative unconsciousness by being the greatest representation of positive consciousness, then that too will be a form of Jung's individuation. You will have achieved the highest, most ideal version of yourself, because you will have contended with the epitome of darkness and lived. And here's something that will totally wreck your mind, as it did mine. The reward you get for contending with Nyx is the World card, the final card in the Tarot's Major Arcana. This card is so packed with symbolism that to explain it all would be a video unto itself. The best I can do is say what it represents, and then refer you to all the evidence I have compiled elsewhere. The four symbols on the outside represent the four faces of the highest god in Judeo-Christianity, the faces that the prophet Ezekiel sees in his vision. The four colors represent the four elements of the alchemists combining to create their form of apotheosis, the philosopher's stone, which was synonymous with the Aristotelian element of ether, represented by the color white. These colors also represent the 5 Tathagata Buddhas, 4 of whom guard the cardinal directions, with the 5th representing the highest goal of esoteric Buddhism, the white void of ultimate reality. If you want to see all the evidence for this, I will refer you to 2 videos. One is called Why the 4 Elements Show Up Everywhere in Fiction. The other is called Majora's Mask is One Big Buddhist Metaphor and Here's Why. That video talks about how the same alchemical and Buddhist influences pervade that particular game in the Legend of Zelda series. I think I included all the details that I wanted to include for a broad overview of the Persona series. However, there are a lot more details that I could talk about if I did videos focusing on one Persona game at a time. If you want me to unveil those secrets, then make sure to help support this video by giving it a like, leaving a comment, and sharing it with other Persona fans. And remember, if you want to help ensure the continuation of this type of in-depth analysis, please consider checking out my Patreon and Subscribe Star. Until next time, remember to stay safe and stay yellow.